everyone. I am Chris Hamilton. I'm the founder of Hamilton Education and a few other college consulting and test prep companies that I've co-founded and sold. Tonight, I'm going to talk briefly, I hope, keeping it under 30 minutes, about 8 open secrets of contemporary college admissions. They're open secrets, so I'm calling this college not so confidential. In other words, um, when you think about the word confidential, I call to mind Anthony Bourdain. He wrote a piece in the New Yorker called Kitchen Confidential that revealed the secrets of a restaurant kitchen. He instantly became famous. One secret, he said, don't get seafood in a restaurant on a Monday because it was probably delivered on a Friday. LA Confidential, revealing the secrets of LA's seamy underworld, largely in the movie, the fact that the LAPD apparently were the largest drug distributors in the city. I'm going to talk about some open secrets. These are not quite so confidential things. Anyone could probably tell you these things if they're inside the industry, and maybe even anyone in my office could tell you. But they're things that people are often surprised by or confused by. So, to begin, traditional rankings and notions of reach, target, safety are out the window largely because of test optional admissions. Uh, okay, out the window. Everyone kind of knows that Stanford and Harvard, they have gotten much harder to get into. And so we get to around 2019, 2020, they're below 5%. People may not realize what I'm showing you now, the repercussions of um, observing that Duke has a 4.5% acceptance rate, that Princeton has a 4.5 acceptance rate, but Vanderbilt is 5.6, Brown is 5.7, Pomona. When I first came to San Diego from Los Angeles, people would ask me if Pomona was Cal Poly. Pomona, no. Rice is 7.8%. USC is 10%. I won't tell you what we joked about when I was teaching English at UCLA in terms of the acronym USC, but it wasn't University of Southern California. USC is 10% acceptance rate. What happens when you get into this um, small this low in acceptance rate is you get a lot of volatility, you get a lot of unpredictability, you get students who apply Brown early decision to take advantage of the fact that they perceive it'll be easier to get into than their dreamiest choices like Stanford. And the student I'm thinking of in Los Angeles was rejected straight up by Brown, but with the same apps got into Columbia and Stanford. That's the new reality. And it's not really a secret. It's just not well known by the public. It used to be that you could look at this kind of ranking created by US News and see that some schools at the very top, perhaps no one was likely to get in, but you go down a little bit, surely, Dartmouth or Brown will nibble. And if you get into Yale, of course, you're going to get into all of the ones below. That hasn't been true for a long, long time. I have clients who are very smart, very sophisticated people who say, "Oh my gosh, we didn't get into USC early. This is a terrible sign." Um, I have people who didn't get into USC early who are attending um, Ivy League schools in the fall. I have a student who got into every school except University of Michigan. It's not yield protection. We'll talk about what that means in a bit. Test blind admissions meant that American universities got something they had longed to achieve, which is a flood of additional applications. Universities get better. They get up this list by rejecting more people. But you got to have more people apply to reject more people. Despite how universities frame things, their dream is to reject more and more people. When you get an email, you get a little message from a college. It could be that they secretly long to meet you and they will accept you. It is absolutely certain that they want more rejections than they had the previous year. Test optional admissions gave UCLA, or rather, test blind gave UCLA 40,000 more applicants. Almost instantly, UCLA got better, even though by many traditional common sense metrics, UCLA is probably not better. Test optional admissions gave Wellesley the most apps they've ever had, 8,900 last year. And Yale test optional um, meant an additional 20,000 applicants. So Yale received 57,000 applications last year, which begs the question, can 10 or 12 people read 57,000? When you look at the UCs, I want to remind you of some math that I pointed out in other webinars. UC readers are typically paid $2 per app. The apps have 3,000 words pretty typically. The average college grad reads 235 words per minute. They should, if they don't take a break, get through 4.6 apps in an hour. But the hourly wage would be, if you get through 4.6 apps, $9.60. So either the UCs are violating every state and federal law regarding minimum wage, or the people reading them are not reading them. They're skimming the essays. And the 15 or 16 full-time admissions people, there may be fewer on some campuses, there's no way they can even read the notes that the part-time readers produce. So you see the UCs, Berkeley and UCLA, have gone up the ranking. They've gone up 5, 6, 7 points. These rankings are so important to universities. Um, there are examples of universities where where a dean is unceremoniously fired because he's inflated SAT averages. Claremont McKenna had a dean who inflated the average SAT of an incoming student by 13 points. But that meant they almost certainly went up. They care about these rankings tremendously. What this means, though, given that schools like Tufts or USC, which many people think, following wisdom from 8, 9 years ago, that a student who looks amazing has a good chance of getting in, that's not the case. This is a typical way um, a high school counselor would advise students to portion out their applications. In fact, this is borrowed from an actual student who came to see me just a week or two ago. Reaches, targets, and safeties. The traditional wisdom, which I think is dangerous now, says, 5 or 6 reaches, 5 or 6 targets, 5 or 6 safeties. But if we look at this for a moment, um, this is a person applying for computer science, engineering. UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, has around a 3 to 4% acceptance rate in that major. So not really sure by what standard that is a target. Johns Hopkins might be perceived by this family to be somehow less exalted than Yale and Columbia, but I assure you Johns Hopkins does not see it that way. And a safety school, again, for engineering and computer science, is apparently, we're told, Purdue. Purdue has about a 4% acceptance rate. So these people are living dangerously. SDSU, in many majors, including engineering and computer science, will have extremely low single-digit acceptance rates. And because they're only looking at grades, you got to be pretty confident that your excellent grades are somehow more excellent than the 40,000 other people with excellent grades. Um, I recommend, given this reality, if you're a really competitive applicant, if you're pretty strong, a reverse snowman. 10 or 15 reaches might result in 1 or 2 acceptances, but I want to remind you, you can only go to one college at a time. So one Duke, one USC, one Ivy League school is really all you need, and you might get 2 or 3. We had some students this year who got into uh, all the Ivies to which they applied. These are special kids. Um, we have many students who are deciding between some very strong choices. I recommend 6 to 10 targets and only 2 to 3 safeties if the safety is actually a safety. It's not a safety if you would never go. If you would go to community college instead of going to this university, it's not a safety. It's also not a safety if it has a 4% acceptance rate. But the reverse snowman, the upside down snowman, is a good way to think about um, a way of dealing with this new reality. Number two, the second thing to think about is test optional is not an option for most applicants. I've given numerous presentations about this. I'm going to make this very quick. This is the president of Dartmouth, this rather thoughtful looking person, and she said test optional didn't work because the kids that we wanted, marginalized kids who we thought, aha, we can um, maybe improve our outreach to these students. They didn't send in their SAT scores because Dartmouth's messaging said it's optional. Many well-intended counselors said, well, then don't send in your scores because your scores are below Dartmouth's average. But the president of Dartmouth herself said, we would have gladly accepted kids with 1400s who are in marginalized categories, but we didn't have any scores. The common wisdom, which is dangerous, that I hear all the time in counseling offices, these are hardworking, well-intended, busy people. I'm not trying to diss them, but they will often tell kids, oh, don't send in your scores if they're not like really, really great. Um, it's not the time to talk about that in depth. I've done that in other contexts, but that is simply not the case. MIT said test optional didn't work. It made it harder to get diversity. Um, and the New York Times even has writers talking about the misguided war on the SAT. Purdue recently, 6, 7 months ago, told me the percentage of students they accepted without scores last year was 3%. 97% of their accepted students submitted scores. So think about that. Number three, if you're applying for an impacted major like engineering or computer science or nursing, throw the traditional rankings out the window. I'm still a little bit surprised that people may not fully comprehend that when you're looking at engineering rankings, take a peek at this. Um, if we look at traditional university rankings in US news, an MIT professor years ago pointed out if you cross off the word best and you write instead oldest and richest, same ranking. Doesn't move at all. The engineering schools, though, are not going to be divvied up in terms of the oldest and the richest. Notice that Yale is 37. I've highlighted it among a few other schools. Harvard is 30. It's on par with North Carolina State, UC Davis, and University of Colorado Boulder. And Harvard is quite a few spots below University of Washington or University of Southern California. And although on this ranking, Purdue is 43 and University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is 35. When we look at Purdue and UIUC in the engineering rankings, Purdue is 8th. It's higher than any Ivy League university. And UIUC is royalty in the world of engineering. It's tied with Caltech. I have students who are disappointed they didn't get into the UCs they want. And I'm disappointed too because they're massively qualified. One student I'm thinking of, he's at UIUC. He created an entrepreneurship incubator called Build Illinois. Um, um, I think he should have been in California paying um, through his California state income tax, his family pays in-state tuition in California. Instead, that money's going to Illinois, and his initiative, his entrepreneurship is built in Illinois. Um, but on the other hand, he's in a top program. The only UC that comes close to UIUC is Berkeley. So when you're trying to think about your strategy, you want to consider Wisconsin, Madison, and University of Maryland, Penn State. When it comes to engineering and computer science, these are essentially Ivy League schools. Number four, the UCs did not merely go test blind They quietly changed their entire admissions system. Other than UC Merced, which has been designated as the kind of catch-all, the almost official safety school, there is no safety in the UCs or Cal States. I want you to consider this young man, um, Stanley Zhang, and his family, who are bringing a lawsuit against the UCs. He had a 4.4 GPA. He had a 1590 SAT. He created a nonprofit to teach computer science to marginalized kids, and he started a company. Um, his results for the UCs, zero, got into zero. His results for the Cal States got into zero. Someone just last week came into the office, maybe 2 weeks ago, at their very expensive private school. The counselor said UC San Diego would be a safety. Um, that doesn't make sense to me. In fact, some of you have seen this graphic before. Student number one has a 1590 on the SAT, 4.4 ISEF Grand Award, a million other accomplishments. She did not get in to UC San Diego. Student number two, whose PSAT score um, was really profoundly low, suggesting a lack of familiarity with grammar, with algebra, with geometry. This student got into UC San Diego. If you were thinking, well, this is yield protection, student number one got into Riverside, but was told she was accepted for her second choice major. If you're thinking yield protection, you're thinking, universities don't want to say yes to someone amazing because if the school's not amazing, they won't go and they'll hurt the yield numbers, which go into the US News rankings. Yes, that happens. But Riverside said yes to student number one, but for her second choice major. Um, I have 100 examples of things that suggest yield protection is not what's explaining this pattern in the UCs. My point is simply the UCs are not your safety. The Cal States are not your safety. The UCs used to, in 2018, have a holistic admission system. People on the far right didn't like it because it would not look at just objective measures. It gave room for other measures, something I think makes sense to me. But you could see that um, great grades made you about 55% likely to get in, and great scores made you about 52%. They won't get you all the way there. There had to be more about you as a person. Um, the new post 2020 um, realities in the UCs have given us many examples of students accepted to Stanford and Harvard and rejected by many or even most of the UCs. Again, this is not yield protection. Number five, traditional wisdom about the advantages of a good high school. This wisdom is now, again, out the window. Um, when we look at the common data sets that the UCs make available, they're very happy to share. I want you to consider you used to, in 2018, see students at Del Norte, Westview, CCA, apparently more of them took hard classes, more of them did well in those classes, more of them did well on tests that were trying to confirm that their grades were actually the product of rigor. Uh, they were accepted at almost double the acceptance rate for the state for UC San Diego. Notice that Bonita Vista and King Chavez are still each of them above the average. Students were not really disadvantaged being in these schools, but when I would meet students from Bonita Vista, um, I met one who had all A's and she was an awesome kid. And I'm very happy to tell you she went to Berkeley. Again, holistic admission. But she also told me she failed all of her AP exams, every single one, except for AP Psych. And she told me in a very thoughtful, almost confessional moment that she thought that her AP Psych teacher was the worst teacher she ever had. Mean, didn't understand that she was an A student. And when she told me that that was the only AP exam for which she received a three, she said, maybe she was the best teacher I ever had at Bonita Vista. King Chavez has a 40% absentee rate in some years. That means what you imagine it would mean. 40% of the students don't show up on a given day. When we look at what happened to these high schools post 2020, when we see what happened last year, it is not true what I hear all the time that the UCs just got way more competitive. The acceptance rates are lower, um, much lower for some of the strongest high schools, but for other high schools that are in many ways less rigorous, the acceptance rates doubled. Bonita Vista is now 61% acceptance rate to UC San Diego. If we look at King Chavez carefully, almost everyone who showed up um, got in to UC San Diego. And when you see CCA, Westview, Del Norte at 15, 13, 11%, um, you better believe there's some kids who are not getting in to Ivies and are not getting in to the UCs, but who are nearly perfect in every measurable way. Fortunately, currently, there are merit-driven rather than diversity and identity-driven campuses. Purdue, Illinois still tend to say yes to pretty extraordinary students. I worry what happens when that reality shifts. If enough people apply to those schools, um, they'll behave more like Ivies. Here's another example. Westview had a 44% acceptance rate to Berkeley. I'm happy to tell you in our office for many, many years until 2021, we had higher than 80% acceptance rate for our students into Berkeley. Westview in 2021, the first year of test blind admissions, Westview had a 6.7% acceptance rate. So when I say that the traditionally good schools, the schools that people um, make sacrifices to live in those districts for, the schools that people often pay out of pocket $40,000, I'll name them in a moment, really excellent private schools. If we look at the new trends in San Diego County applying to UC San Diego, the strongest acceptance rates are Gompers, Bonita Vista, King Chavez. It looks like in Bonita Vista, 74 students were accepted, a 61% acceptance rate. If we look at if we look at Del Norte, 36 students last year were accepted to UC San Diego. That's an 11% acceptance rate. Bishops, La Jolla Country Day, these are excellent schools. I can't say enough about the teachers at CCA, at Bishops, at Torrey Pines. They introduce rigor and they give Bs to students unless they're performing in a very impressive way. These Bs are costly, so you do need to think a little bit. In 2025, the UCs are going to be asked to revisit their testing policy. I'm going to predict there's going to be two forces, one unstoppable, one immovable. We'll see what happens, but these two forces are the UCs do not want to give up the extraordinary gains they've made in producing one model of diversity, but they are absolutely engaging in admissions that's by almost any standard violating the civil rights of some groups of students. And I would say these are groups of students in California who um, were once subject in the 20th century to many violations of their civil rights. And for some groups, groups of students that within living memory and their families were colonial um, possessions of the British Crown. Um, but currently, you got to feel kind of silly if you're ponying up the dough to send your kid to Bishops or Cathedral or La Jolla Country Day, assuming that you're getting an advantage in admissions. With a few exceptions, that is simply not true any longer. You are getting smaller class sizes and pretty extraordinary faculty. Certainly, I can attest to that. Um, The only schools that perform worse than Cathedral or Bishops or Del Norte are schools that the number of people applying is so small they just don't consider them to be meaningful data points. Um, Almost overnight, the best schools in San Diego, based on rigor and performance, have the lowest acceptance rates. If you're not aware of that, you should be. This is also echoed throughout California. I've also seen personally, anecdotally, my students that live outside of California, they do measurably better. They are bringing out of state full bill tuition, and the UCs have perennially had to apologize, promise not to promote out of state students with greater admissions results, and then they backslide. I'm going to tell you a little bit about college essays and things that I've seen over the years that are, not so confidential secrets. Essay advice on TikTok abounds. My smartest students are on TikTok seeing what they should write about and what they should do. I'm going to tell you the advice regarding college essays on TikTok is about on par with medical and investment advice on TikTok. If someone is telling you apple cider vinegar will cure leukemia, beware, caution. Your essays matter tremendously, but um, perhaps not in the way TikTokers are suggesting. Your comment up personal statement, in my considerable experience, should show two things: impact, what you did, and insight, how you see that, how you see the world. And it must reflect the ideological convictions of the admissions readers. In many ways, the work I do at the very highest level is to take amazing kids and wonderful families and help them understand. I spent years on the campus of UCLA. I understand the ideological convictions of the people who are reading your essays. And often they are in tension with the ideological convictions of a 1.5 generation immigrant family. There are basically two college stories you can tell. Something happened to me, and I happened to something. If you read an essay on TikTok and someone seems to be talking about the letter S, they don't like the letter S, come on, that essay is actually about the fact that the word parents ends in the letter S. And this person doesn't like the fact, understandably, that her mother died last year. This is an essay in which the central premise is something happened to me. If what happened to you is you got a B last year, or what happened to you is you grew up stuttering, or your grandma is ill, this doesn't compete with my mother died or we were homeless. I had a student once write about a father who was kidnapped for ransom by a Mexican cartel. That is something happened to me. Most of my students are going to write a different type of essay. I happened to something. Um, that is why years ago on a post-it I wrote, and then someone in the office made it more presentable. I wrote a little draft of this. A kid named William Hang, who's a genius, wrote an initial draft about being on a volunteer trip in Mexico. He's on a bus bench, and an old man tells the sad story of this old man's sad life. And in a pretty unconvincing way, the essay weaves its way toward a music volunteering program that William was part of. And when I asked William, why are you writing about this? He talked about YouTube. He talked about a book his mother bought him. And I simply pointed out that William, in my understanding, had created in the ninth grade a machine learning tool back probably around 2011 um, to teach computers to read prostate cancer slides on a Gleason scale. He entered what he had built in the Greater San Diego Engineering and Science Fair, won a grand award, went to ISEF where he got second in the world. They sent him and the other global winners to Switzerland, to the Large Hadron Collider, where he, um, along with the other winners, shared the story of his project. A senior scientist got excited and offered to connect him with a friend of his at Johns Hopkins who had a startup company called Proscia doing exactly what William was doing. Only the CEO, when he reviewed William's material, said, I don't think we should be mentoring you. I think you should be mentoring my team. We're going to give you equity shares in the company and a C-level executive title. And so I asked William, which story do you think would be better? I met a sad old man, and that made me um, feel more thankful for the things I have, or I wondered if I could do this because doctors make mistakes and computers don't. And I did do this. And then we end it with all the other things that you've created for other kids locally in science. And then we'll have another essay about music. And I'm happy to tell you, William got into Harvard. He got into Stanford. He got into UPenn Management and Technology. He started a company that Sequoia, one of the largest and oldest and most significant VCs in Silicon Valley, funded. William's an amazing kid, but if he had written about an old man he had met, um, I think he would have been one of thousands who have incredible statistics and incredible accomplishments who don't get in. In fact, here's one. A lot of people are talking about this poor guy, Zach Yadagari. Um, Almost certainly, he's a pretty impressive guy. He started a company. He built an app. You take a picture of food, and it tells you how many calories are in it. Thousands of people have lost collectively thousands of pounds. He also has brought in revenues north of $30 million. But as you can see, he's the object of a lot of conversation because he was rejected almost everywhere. In fact, I would probably point out in my world, I tell people all the time, merit-driven schools include UT Austin, Georgia Tech, U Miami, not perfectly so, but they will overlook the fact that Zach really messed up his essay. He shared his essay, and you can find it. I'm not going to go into detail about what he did wrong, except to say it has a lot of impact and very little insight that will help him. Um, the whole internet has been in the last 2 weeks discussing this poor kid. And I'm just going to let you take a quick look at some of these little blurbs here. But there are people sharing countless stories of 1580. My kid was amazing, did all these incredible things, rejected by all but one college, a state school in Massachusetts, UMass Amherst. Um, but I'm more interested in the people who, there's a young woman, she's not here, who claims that she worked in Yale's admissions office, and she said something that really struck me and frankly ticked me off. She said, "Ugh, like we already have your CV and your like other stuff, so like you shouldn't write about what you did. Like the essay is more like a vibe." I'm almost quoting her directly. She's not all wrong. There is a vibe, and this guy had the wrong vibe. You've got to read his essay to understand what I mean. But I beg you, if you did something that earned you second place in the International Science and Engineering Fair, you got to tell them a little bit about it. William told me, he said, Mr. Hamilton, no, no, no. That's not what YouTube says. That's not what the book says. That's not what my high school counselor said. They said that's in my resume. I don't write about that. But we looked at the resume. The resume just said Chief Innovation Hacker, Proscia Incorporated. No one knows what that is. Um, I would point out memoirs are collections not just of people's feelings, but things that people did. Movies are things that people do. Your essay is a story. It should have a plot. You got to do something. Um, this is a famous book, series of books offering all kinds of guidance. Some of it's very helpful. But um, someone once brought me an essay in this book to use as a model. She said, I could write an essay just like this. This kid didn't want to be in a play, and his drama teacher at his fancy private school in Texas kind of forced him to try out for a play, and he didn't hate it. It's like green eggs and ham. I thought I would hate this, but turns out I didn't hate it. And he went to Princeton. It took me 2 minutes to find this kid's name, and locate him in the Princeton Football Hall of Fame. He was Texas 5A quarterback of the year. Um, Most of the essays that are viral, I can probably point to something in them that explains more than the essay itself, um, what's going on. If you are a recruited athlete, if you can kick a football 40 yards through two goalposts, you come to me. Uncle Chris will help you. Um, Yasha Monk, who's a public intellectual and wrote a wonderful book called The Identity Trap, which is a very thoughtful um, kind of history of what is going on in American academia right now. He wrote an essay on his Substack called The College Essay is Everything That's Wrong with America. I don't entirely agree that we should burn it to the ground. Because the Cal States have gotten rid of the essay, and they've certainly found a way to get what they want, which is honestly fewer Asian kids in the Cal States. So I don't think banishing the essay will solve everything, but there's deeply, deeply problematic issues with the college essay. Again, for another day, we'll go into it. The seventh of these eight quirky, not so confidential secrets: scholarships don't work the way most people think. Here's a typical headline: millions in scholarships and grant money unclaimed. Uh, this is not totally false, but it's not really meaning what they're suggesting it means. These millions are the aggregate of $500 or $1,000 private non-renewable scholarships. You often have to apply. You have to write an essay. Um, they're not going to change your financial fortune. Almost everyone gets scholarships wrong, especially the media. You don't find them, you don't apply for them. Really smart, highly educated people in my office knock on my door and say, "You got to find us some scholarships." It honestly doesn't really work that way, with a few rare exceptions. You earn them. You are either accepted to an incredible university that has so much money they can admit need blind, and if they discover you have no money, they will pay for college. And believe me, I have students at Harvard. They are paying nothing. I have students who are at Stanford. They pay nothing. Or you get into a good top tier university, but that university is willing to pay for a student who looks like a Harvard or Stanford student. Those are rarer circumstances than they used to be. Literally, USC told me, speaking to two different USC folks in Los Angeles last year, they told me, now that we're 10% acceptance rate, we don't have to pay for those students. We offer them less money and they come here anyway, which is true. There's athletic scholarships. They rarely offer full ride. And if it's an Ivy or a D3, there's no such thing as an athletic scholarship. There's small value, non-renewable. We talked about them: a car dealership, a local Rotary. There's need-based scholarships. These are very important, but if you can afford a house in Carmel Valley, you're probably not going to get a need-based scholarship. In my world, the most important are merit scholarships. Um, this is a kid who's been all over the local news. I'm super happy for him. Not picking on this kid in one little way. He's awesome. His name is Kyson Hansen, I think. But the story gives a very false impression to most people about how scholarships work. He's earning over $3 million in scholarships. Okay, we don't know if they're merit. My guess would be they probably are merit driven rather than need based, but I would need more information, and it's none of my business to ask him and his family. Why would I? I'm just happy for this kid. But someone told me that their son just the other day said, "Man, what's he going to do with $3 million?" No, no, no. He applied to 63 universities. The average financial aid from each university is $47,000 for this young man, and that's $47,000 chopped into four. So the average is probably more like 12 or 15,000. Um, uh, I can point you to schools that are in the top tier that have produced uh, endless doctors, finance, business leaders, and because they want to go up just a few points in US news. And because they have $1 billion in their endowment, and because they're in the Midwest, if you have good scores and good grades, they will give you $160,000 over 4 years. Someone, a Louisiana teenager last year, got $9 million in offers. But keep in mind, she applied to 170 schools. I don't know what component is merit and what is need. It's very likely a mixture of them. But again, the reporting gives exactly the wrong sense of how you get a scholarship. It says one of the most impressive aspects of this record is that there are no third-party scholarships. Rather, the offers all came directly from the schools. Um, no, that's that's not impressive. It's not unusual. That's the norm. Third-party scholarships are often a rounding error in this kind of situation. And I want you to consider this girl 170 schools. She doesn't have $9 million. She's going to most likely have about $62,000 contributed to her 4 year educational spending split into fourths. Um, Merit scholarships are the biggest secret. And um, we have every year families who will get um, deep into six figures, 100, 200. Sometimes I've had a student get more than $300,000 in merit scholarships. And from my point of view, I don't care whether it's a need or merit. We just want people to know scholarships don't work the way the media is telling you. And knowing how they actually work is how you actually get scholarships. These internal merit scholarships are tremendously valuable, and they are designed, as we've kind of said already, to pull you away, to steal an Ivy League student away from the Ivies into what would have been traditionally be considered one notch down, or someone who gets into Duke or Vanderbilt, but isn't going to get this kind of scholarship. They might get a scholarship to Kenyon or DePauw. In fact, GPA, scores, impact, and insight. This should sound familiar. These are the things that can give you a kind of named scholarship. When I say named, I mean a Columbia Raby scholarship. We have someone this year who got a $10,000 a year merit scholarship to Columbia. Columbia doesn't like advertising them because it reminds Columbia that they're not Harvard. But they're hoping if a student didn't get into Harvard and didn't get into Stanford, they're hoping that $10,000 a year will be a sweetener. The A.B. Duke scholarship, very, very generous. You got to look so good that it looks like you probably got into Harvard. The Cornelius Vanderbilt scholarship. It's going to be curious what happens to these because now that Vanderbilt and Duke have the same acceptance rates as the Ivies, will they do what USC has done, which is essentially trim back these scholarships because, frankly, they don't need to offer them to get the best students. Finally, very quickly, very briefly, very frustratingly, nearly all educational reporting is deeply flawed. I want to draw your attention to this story from the San Francisco Chronicle. What GPA is needed to get into UCLA and UC Berkeley? Here's the data explained. This is like a story that says, what height is required to play in the NBA? If you believe that this one-dimensional thing, height, is the only factor, then okay. But I mean, anyone that knows anything about the UCs would say, you people are nincompoops. This is ridiculous. Los Angeles Times runs endless stories about the diversity in the UCs, and they're talking about how the fall class at UCLA bucks the trend of diversity decline at elite campuses after the affirmative action ban. I promise you, it's no secret how they're doing that. They just ignored all of the state and federal injunctions against using identity and ethnicity. They're using proxies, they're using zip codes and schools. I'll leave it to others to debate whether that's right or wrong, although most of the courts have come down pretty firmly on one side on that one. The Education Writers Association is a group of education writers. I just want to remind you, these are people who have peers. They go to conferences. They want to be respected, and they don't want to say things um, that might make them that might make their peers uncomfortable or be criticized. These are powerful social forces. Um, you better be very cautious when you look at a story reporting something about education, um, because the people reporting it often have a pretty narrow ideological view of the world. Um, I wanted to, let me see how we're doing here. Okay, I went a little over what I was hoping to do. I want to make sure if anyone has any questions for me, if anyone has anything at all that they want me to be thinking about, I'll try to address it now. I'm gonna um, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm gonna look and see if there's anything in the chat, and if there isn't, I'll remind people to simply send me um, an email or make an appointment to come meet with us. Right now, I'm not seeing questions. Just curious because I've never experienced that before. Here we go. Someone raised a hand. Um, I see a hand raised, but I'm not sure if there's a question. Maybe whoever raised their hand could just put in chat a question. That's the easiest. I don't. Um, uh, can you share the screen? Someone's asking, can you share the screen with acceptance of the UCs and weightage of the criteria for admission? I'm not sure which one you mean. I'll make sure that this is available so you can go through it. But in 2018, the UCs, and I can make sure that you get this. Chat is disabled. Georgia, someone's saying chat is disabled, although I'm seeing some people chatting me some questions here. Um, uh, the UCs used to show criteria, and in 2019 they stopped publishing it. And now there's almost no admissions criteria. They just show ethnicity and geography, which is, I think, very likely going to be Exhibit A in a civil trial against the UCs. Someone's asking, when should you start writing essays? I don't think you should start writing the essays until the summer of 12th, but I would say when you're planning the essays, you should start as early as the ninth or 10th grade because again, it is not what TikTok suggests that you're going to come up with the quirkiest, interesting fact about yourself. The essays should have an awareness that colleges want to see your impact. And you want to be thinking as early as ninth or 10th grade, what's my story going to be? The story is probably not going to be some unique species of suffering that you've encountered. Your story will be something you really cared about, something you dug into, maybe something you discovered or built that got some kind of recognition. And then the story will be how you built resources for others um, to 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 explore that as well. Um, yes, someone's saying, would you change the values of the reverse snowman if your child has some B's in their transcript? Yeah, although depends how many, but yes, I would. That's a really, really smart question. Um, I would have more um, maybe in the target range. Um, and someone else is asking, they've heard parents saying it's easier for girls to get in versus boys into engineering. Is there any truth to this? Yes, there is, but there's less truth in it than there was. That is in counterbalance with the fact that If universities picked strictly on gender blind admissions, most universities would be 70% women. And we know when a university gets too lopsided, the women and the men don't want to go there anymore, with the exceptions of single gender campuses like Wellesley or Barnard. Um, the I would say there's still a slight advantage to being a girl, um, but it's more modest than it has traditionally been. Um, Someone is asking which schools other than UCs are good for computer science. That's a very important question. I would refer you to that chunk of engineering rankings, and also I would refer you to rankings of undergrad computer science programs. These are a little wobbly because they're really just asking deans of computer science programs and department chairs, what do you think of these programs? But that's about as good as we're going to get. To give you a sense of it, UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, is in the top five, a little bit ahead of Caltech, believe it or not. Cornell and Georgia Tech are tied with Princeton when it comes to computer science. And University of Washington, it's above Harvard. It is in the top 10. UT Austin, UCLA, UC San Diego, and Yale are very high in the ranking. But I also would point out Purdue, Michigan. There's UPenn, an Ivy League, but also Wisconsin, Madison right in there. Brown and Duke are strong, but USC, Harvey Mudd, Irvine, Davis, Ohio State, UC Boulder, but anyone can find those lists. Um, Someone's asking about a current sophomore. When's a good time to contact us? Um, 10th grade is an excellent time to meet with us because that's usually when I want students to think about the SAT and ACT, and it's when students usually have enough experiences to figure out what their interests and goals are. Someone's asking a really important question. How many colleges would you recommend a strong student should apply to? It's meaningful that in the international schools that I work with students in Singapore, students in Peru, students in Brazil. The smartest ones have changed their policy. They used to say 8 schools is all you should apply to. We don't want you to get stressed. They've started to absorb the kinds of things that people like me have noticed for a while. You cannot apply to 8 schools given that I see no, 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 no from every Ivy level school, and then a yes from Stanford. I see that once or twice a year. Um, I see yes Berkeley and then no from all other UCs except maybe one. I would say more schools than I would have in the past. To me, 20 doesn't seem like too many, given especially that the UCs should really be counted as one. You pay for everyone to which you apply, but you only have to fill out one application and click boxes. I will have some students who apply to a few more than that. In the old days, someone applying to 30 schools, I thought that was crazy. I'm not so sure anymore. I do not recommend 63. I do not recommend 170 unless your goal is to be the feature of a local news story, in which case, go for it. Um, Someone says for moderate GPA, would it be low reach, high target, low safety? I'd have to think about what that means exactly before I give an answer. I want to make sure we're talking about the same term. So please feel free to send me an email. Admission into service academies, if you mean the ones that are featured in movies like West Point or the Air Force Academy or the Naval Academy, there are some differences. They're very, very selective, but they have different sensibilities than Ivies. They are interested in different things. It's beyond the scope of this conversation to go into it, but that's a really excellent question and a very interesting one. I'd be happy to talk with anyone about it in an email or in a meeting. Simply put, Um, the service academies are interested in whether you really want to go there, and Harvard and Stanford don't really care. Um, the service academies have people drop out. It's tough. They're less impressed. They're they have slightly lower standards for scores, but higher standards in some other things that I think matter. Ooh, excellent question. Someone says, how good are college predictor websites for assessing admit probability, like College Vine? I almost put College Vine in the slides, but I thought, I don't want to pick on them. They are terrible. They are truly terrible. They are not just useless, but dangerous. Um, College predictor websites start out with assumptions about rankings and assumptions about merit that do not obtain in the current reality. So um, they are dangerous. Um, do I believe that acceptances will increase as maybe the denominator may shrink? Um, yeah, maybe. I think it's a complicated landscape. Yes, that may happen. Also, we're kind of at a peak of the population of young people, and we're seeing some students take themselves out of the running in terms of college applications. But I would say the entrenched notions about how admissions should be heavily focused on identity, factors which my students cannot control, and the degree to which Ivy League schools and Ivy level schools use donors and legacy and athletes and boarding schools as factors. That's never talked about, but very powerful factor. Those things are going to be hard to chip away at. Um, and someone's asking about what's a high versus moderate GPA in CCA Westview. For the UCs, I got to tell you, I wouldn't think in terms of an absolute GPA number at all. I would think in terms of Bs. And I will tell you, this is scary. The unweighted, the unweighted median GPA at UCLA last year was a 4.0. The typical kid, how many Bs did he have, she have, getting into UCLA? None. Zero. Now, for other schools that I'm going to call more merit driven, what would be a good GPA? 4.1, 4.2. As many of you know, if you're at Westview CCA, a 4.3 GPA means you took hard classes and you're almost perfect. Bishops and other private schools used to kind of play a clever game. They would weight a lot of honors and advanced honors, and students could have a 4.9 GPA. And in the old days, that was actually quite advantageous. But with the UCs, as you can see, these schools that are really extraordinarily good schools, they have 11, 13% acceptance rates. The UCs don't care much about that absolute weighted GPA. They care about Bs because the students that they want, who are in many ways, marginalized and underserved schools, these schools have equitable grading policies. They have no homework policies, and they don't have students with many Bs. Um, and someone is saying something about, fewer people applying because they can't go test optional. Yeah, that will play out. We'll just have to wait and see. Someone's asking about recommended resources to find mid-sized large colleges that are strong in humanities. I'd probably say I don't charge anything to come sit down and meet with us. Um, um, I'm not aware of a resource that's just out there. There are some that might be helpful. Someone has asked, when schools claim they don't look at demonstrated interest, is that false? I'd be kind of inclined to mostly believe them, except that I would say most pronouncements that come from universities, you can assume they're probably in bad faith. They if a major university, if it were a person, you would say it was a sociopath. Um, just not concerned about telling the truth. I would say when Stanford and Harvard say they don't really care about demonstrated interest within a certain framework, that's true because they don't care the way probably Scarlett Johansson doesn't care whether a guy is interested in her. Why would she care? Other schools, smaller ones, often are very interested in demonstrated interest. So I think you'd have to do it case by case. Recommendation letters, I think, are quite important. You should know there are no recommendation letters for the UCs or Cal States at all. And most of the recommendation letters are probably neutral. They don't really add or subtract. I would say my thoughts on recommendation letters are if you are a certain personality type and you're very demanding and you make sure that people are, really giving your kid the resources you feel he or she deserves, if you're kind of, pardon me, but a hard ass, I want you to consider only one really negative interaction could um, come through, maybe in a letter of rec. You want to be smiling, charming, and letters of rec for kids who are smiley, happy, wonderful. They are very, very helpful. Um, yeah, I mean, we someone's asking about test prep for kids who are very busy. We have tutoring options that are infinitely flexible and have been very effective for people. Um, Someone's asking about internships as a compensator. For some universities, and I'm happy to talk privately, there are lots of things that are compensators for GPA. Um, for the UCs, um, the best compensator for GPA for the UCs is a hardship, a profound, meaningful hardship. I don't want to take up any more of anyone's time. I want to thank everyone for the really excellent questions. And I do welcome you to send me an email. If I said something and you strongly disagree, send me an email. If you have a question, you think I didn't maybe touch on something to the extent that you would have wished, send me an email. Um, I'm very proud of our students who did very well, um, and we had many. Someone's asking about legacy at Ivy's. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, it won't. Traditionally, how much does being a legacy favor you at an Ivy? By a factor of 10. It takes you generally from around a 3% acceptance rate to about a 30% acceptance rate. 30 is not a guarantee, but man, 10 times. Um, Thank you all very much. I hope everyone has a good evening, and I hope you will reach out to me if you've got questions or even complaints. Um, but thank you all, and have a lovely night.